and Recreation website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record. Official minutes of this meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with regular procedures. The budget bill does not allow the board to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose at all. Rather, they may do so as long as the agenda items that the public body plans to take up are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is the board's responsibility to determine whether the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. At the conclusion of my remarks, I'll ask for a motion for the board to make this determination. If that motion fails, this electronic meeting will end at that point. Again, I hope that it does not fail. I understand that we are opening things back up in the Commonwealth, and that is good and important. However, I think there's some continued uncertainty that necessitates us sticking with this scheduled virtual meeting and hopefully, again, reassessing and being able to do this in person. Again, soon. The budget bill requires compliance with the provisions of Section 2.2-3708.2. Therefore, in accordance with this code section, public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body of any interruption in the telephonic or video broadcast of the meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact Michael Fletcher by phone or text at 804-317-8934. Additionally, if there's an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until public access is restored. Those provisions of the Virginia FOIA Act not addressed by the budget bill will remain in effect. So before we continue with the business portion of the meeting, I'll ask Mr. Fletcher to call the roll for board members and anticipated staff. Other participants will be recorded through the chat window. Again, if you're participating by phone and your name is not called, please call or text Michael at 804-317-8934. In addition, if at any time you lose connection and are unable to reconnect, please contact Michael at the same number. I will now turn it over to you, Mr. Fletcher.
Good morning, and just for the ease of this process, I'll be calling the roll in the order that the names are listed on the bottom of the agenda. Secretary Stigler?
Present.
Ms. Stiff?
Present.
Ms. Hertz?
Present.
And just a note, Ms. Hertz is standing in as proxy for Secretary Ring.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Pollard?
Here.
Mr. Ford?
Here.
Ms. Donner? Mr. Volk?
Present.
Dr. Casey? Ms. Einhoff?
Here.
Ms. Booth? Mr. Presley?
Present.
Mr. Lazaro?
Here.
Mr. Woodley?
Here.
Senator Marsden?
Here.
Senator Stewart?
Here.
Ms. Andrews?
Present.
Reamer? Mr. Jennison? Ms. Powell? Mr. Secretary, you do have a quorum.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. I will now present a recommended motion. To start the meeting and wait for board members to request that motion. The recommended motion is the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation Board of Trustees certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the board to assemble in a single location, and further that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second, this is Bob Lazaro.
Motion made and seconded. Michael, do we need to call the roll?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Secretary Strickler,
Aye.
Ms. Stiff,
Aye.
Ms. Hertz,
Aye.
Mr. Pollard,
Aye.
Mr. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Volk,
Aye.
Dr. Casey, Ms. Imhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Presley,
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro,
Aye.
Mr. Woodley,
Aye.
Senator Marsden,
Aye.
Senator Stewart,
Aye.
Ms. Andrews.
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right, great. Thanks, Michael, and thanks everybody for being with us again today. We have a relatively full agenda this morning, so we'll jump right in. Just a quick overview. We will hear from our interagency task force with the recommendations to award $4.8 million in grants to applications received for the second round of the fiscal year 2021 grant funding. We received applications, 35 applications, and the staff is recommending funding 23 of them. We'll also announce the start of fiscal year 2022 grant round, for which we received $10 million in this year's budget. Thank you, Senators Marsden and Stewart, for that. And of that 10 million, VOF, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, will receive 25% or $2.5 million for their Preservation Trust Fund, which offers grants for a separate program to provide public access and easement assistance for landowners. So I'd also like to mention that this year, thanks to the generosity of the General Assembly, we were able to secure additional state funding for other complementary land conservation programs, $1 million for the Battlefield Protection Program and $1 million for the VDAX Farmland Preservation Program. VOF is also planning another Go Get Outdoors grant round to provide grants for equitable access to parks and open spaces. In addition, we've got a number of irons in the fire as far as federal land conservation funding options, including through the Recreational Trails Program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which, as you know, is significantly increased, and the state side part of that will be seeing a lot more money in coming years. The Forest Legacy Fund and other opportunities. So while we all know that Vlcf continues to be oversubscribed, it's good to know that there are other active programs out there to possibly supplement any of these worthy programs. We'll also, and I think early in the agenda here from Mary Carson Stiff and her readout from the ad hoc subcommittee on the grant manual to present some recommendations for discussion. Before we get started here, do any of the board members have questions or comments or anything they want to share with the group? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our last board meeting, February 5th?
Move approval, Mr. Chairman. This is Bob Lazaro.
Thanks, Bob. Motion made and properly seconded. Michael, will you call the roll, please?
Secretary Strickler,
Aye.
Ms. Stiff,
Aye.
Ms. Hertz,
Aye.
Mr. Pollard,
Aye.
Mr. Ford, Mr. Volk. Sorry, my audio was lost there for a minute. Mr. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Volk,
Aye.
Ms. Imhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Presley,
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro,
Aye.
Mr. Woodley,
Aye.
Senator Marsden,
Aye.
Senator Stewart,
Aye.
Ms. Andrews.
Aye.
The motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go now to Mary Carson Stiff. Mary Carson, I know you and the Grant Manual Subcommittee have met I think a couple of times and have some thoughts you want to share with the group, and you've got a presentation for us today. So I'll turn it over to you for that to kick things off.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the subcommittee of the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation met on March 26th, and we've met once, and we discussed a lot of different issues that were surrounding outreach, as well as some of the procedural and administrative functions of VLCF. And it was an opportunity for subcommittee meeting members to discuss some of the details that often get lost during long meetings where we have a really packed agenda and discussion just kind of takes up too much time. So it was really an opportunity to hear from VLCF staff, which we did. A great presentation from Stu, an overview of how the process works, and a little bit more information about how staff is reaching constituents that would be interested in using the foundation. Everybody froze, so I hope that you can still hear me.
Sorry, Mary Carson. I just made you presenter, so if you wanted to share your screen, you can do that now. I'm sorry, it froze your screen for a second.
Yeah. I don't have a presentation. I have a verbal presentation. So thank you for the opportunity. But my screen is cluttered with all these documents. So yeah, so it was just a really nice opportunity to hear and to have more detailed and open discussion. So the subcommittee members, for those that just need a refresher, it's me, Glenda Booth, Jay Ford, and Bruce Vilk. And there were a lot of state agency staff that were present. You can see the meeting minutes in your folder of materials today. So what I intend to do in this meeting is just to say it was a great time for people to discuss, and there was nice interaction with the other members of the public that were present, who are active and engaged in land conservation in Virginia, as you can imagine, and to report on the main issues that were discussed and the greatest issues of import that the subcommittee felt the board should hear. None of these different items are necessarily coming with a motion, and in fact, none of them are, but just an opportunity to share and discuss where next steps and discussion could potentially occur. If you want to follow along with your meeting minutes from the subcommittee meeting, we're looking at the bullets that are on, I think, page 7 of the PDF. So the first issue that we want to discuss and I want to report back on is how to accommodate Virginia tribal communities better. There was a discussion about allowing tribes to actually apply for VLCF grant funding, and right now they're not eligible to apply. They can apply, but they're not eligible to receive the actual grant funding. And we assume that this will require a legislative change, which was reported during the subcommittee. And essentially, the kind of next step is that we really have staff look to what would be required and what specific language would need to be changed to include tribal communities in the list of eligible applicants for VLCF grant funding. So that's kind of the first step of the inclusion of tribal communities. And then the second issue that we discussed was the inclusion of tribal communities on the VLCF board. This recommendation for board participation, as well as the recommendation for tribal communities to be eligible to receive grant funding, came out of the listening sessions and out of conversations with tribal leaders, with VLCF board members, as well as staff. So for tribal communities to be included on Vlcf board membership. This is what Tom reported out would also require a code change. And so for both of these issues, oh, I'm sorry.
Would people who aren't presenting please mute their microphones? Thanks.
Oh, okay. So the next step is really just to bring it to the board for some sort of, discussion, noting that we do have time restraints. So the two issues, tribal representation on the board and inclusion of tribal communities as eligible applicants.
Any questions or comments, thoughts for Mary Carson on those items?
Mr. Chairman, this
Yes.
is Senator Marsden.
Senator, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. And it is certainly on my list. I've discussed it with Senate Finance in terms of addressing the issue of tribal awards. I think there has to be some guardrails on it, in terms of what a legitimate site would be. And I look forward to hearing from the subcommittee and members of the VLCF board to help us in that process. I think there are some great parcels of land that need to be preserved that are Native American in origin, but I think there does have to be some definitions of the significance of that land or its conservation value. And one of the concerns I think had been that something that was of marginal conservation value and marginal historical value would qualify, and so I think we just need to put some definitions around that to make it easier to make decisions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I have one, Secretary Strickler. I was looking, I don't think we have a raise hand function, right? So is it okay if I just jump in?
Please.
So Mary Carson, I support incorporating tribes more into this process. And I'm sure that, as noted in the minutes, there are a number of ways to do that. But I was wondering if the subcommittee gave any thought to differences between state recognized and federally recognized tribes as far as resources, and as far as, since federally recognized tribes are sovereign governments, that our usual liaison to them, to the Commonwealth, is the Secretary of the Commonwealth. So was any discussion around that?
Thank you, Elizabeth. No, there was no discussion around the difference between federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes, but certainly really important to consider, especially as you noted, the limitations in terms of capacity. So I think that's something that definitely should be considered.
Thank you.
And this is Albert. Excuse me for not being better informed. Is this the appropriate time to talk about the some of the amendments to the grants manual that included African American and cultural and historic resources, or is that later in the agenda?
Mr. Pollard, if it's okay, I think we'd like to save that conversation for a little bit later in the agenda. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, Jay Ford.
Hey, Jay.
Sorry, Jay, go ahead.
So responding or picking up on the thread regarding inclusion of tribal entities, I think since we have our senators here and we are ultimately just making a recommendation around a code change, there seemed to be consensus in the room, and Mary Carson, correct me if you disagree, that we did not want a special classification. We wanted them to be able to compete within the parameters of the VLCF grant round. So the same conservation values would have to apply to applicants but that they were currently strictly prohibited from participating, and that was the only piece that we were interested in. That we wanted to make sure that the conservation aspect was still foremost in the consideration process.
Correct. Yes. Very good to clarify. Yep.
Mr. Secretary, this is Clyde.
Yeah, go ahead, Clyde. I was about to call on you anyway for some clarification there.
Well, I did want to offer one point of clarification, especially those of you that have been on the board for a while. We have on a couple of occasions provided grants for projects to Indian tribes, to native Indian tribes. But the issue at hand is the definition of holder in the code and the ability to hold an easement. So in both of those cases, the tribe, and maybe to Senator Marsden's point, the tribe had to work with a qualified holder such as the Virginia Outdoors Foundation to actually hold the easement. And what has evolved with this, Mr. Secretary, over time is now that the tribes are federally recognized, the whole issue of the ability of a state entity to hold an easement on property that's actually owned, for example, fee simple by a federally recognized tribe has become the nuance here. And I know Catherine Shankles from the AG's office is on if anyone has more technical questions, but I just wanted to clarify that the tribe is not prohibited from applying for a grant. It's just that the tribes, just like any other organization that's not qualified to hold a conservation easement, the tribe's got to have a partner under the current process. And I think that the discussion is to allow the tribes to be able to hold easements, to modify the definition in the code of holder.
Yeah.
The tribe could hold an easement.
I don't think they'll be in your way.
Thanks, Clyde. Again, if folks aren't speaking, can they please mute their microphones? I'll just offer the following. I think Clyde's right. I mean, we do through Vlcf want to accommodate projects working with tribes that meet the purposes of the statutory purposes of Vlcf, and if there is a code tweak that would make that easier, and folks want to do that, then I think that's appropriate. However, from my perspective, and having talked to the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Secretary Thomason, about this, and some other folks within the governor's office, I think probably what we need is a different way to fund land acquisition or reacquisition, as the case may be, for Native American tribes in Virginia. The restrictions, regardless of who the easement holder is for a Vlcf grant, are going to be what they are, right, as far as preserving the conservation purposes of the land. And I know that there are a lot of pieces of property that Virginia tribes want for those purposes, but also for different purposes, and want some additional flexibility. So I think it's worth a conversation, with the two senators who are here and other members who are interested in tribal and land conservation issues, about what we can do on that front. And so I think, hopefully through the development of the governor's outgoing budget, we'll have some kind of a proposal to share with folks.
Mr. Chairman, it's Richard Stewart.
Yes, sir.
And I am new to the board and have not been involved in this discussion prior, but if I understand what Clyde and others are saying, those communities are now able to participate in the grant if there's a valid holder such as VOF or the Northern Neck Land Conservancy or someone else. What other communities do we make exceptions or tweaks to the code for, as you all are discussing doing for this community?
If I could just read the one sentence in the code that talks about who grants can be made to, it says the VLCF shall administer the fund solely for the purposes of providing grants to state agencies, including Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and matching grants to other public bodies and holders. So it does limit who can get the funding.
But isn't there a reason for that? Isn't there a reason that we limit where the funding can go into qualified entities? I'm asking this question. I don't know the answer, but it seems to me we purposely limit the ability to do this to safeguard it because it's public money and we want the conservation value. And so, and I don't know if anybody can answer this question, but do we do this for any other community? That what someone is proposing here? I just trying to look.
I understand your question, and I guess maybe I would ask staff this question. Don't we allow local governments to hold easements?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
So in that respect, Senator, that's a pretty broad, the idea is that that's parallel, and that, you know, people may have a policy disagreement over that, a local government versus a tribal government, but that's the parallel I think that some folks here are trying to draw.
Okay, thank you.
All right, being mindful of the time, I know Mary Carson has a number of other topics to cover here. Are there any additional questions or comments on this topic? Okay, hearing none, Mary Carson, you want to continue?
Yes, okay, thank you all. The second issue is how the subcommittee discussed how best to increase outreach. And I just wanted to note that Vlcf staff has been making a huge effort to increase outreach with that wonderful listening session, which, you know, should absolutely be repeated in the future, and through the notification of board materials to the impacted communities and organizations, such as an email with lots of notice to the Vault organization. So I just wanted to note that there have been some great steps taken by Vlcf staff, and just wanted to note that the next step for this particular issue is that the Vlcf subcommittee will continue to tackle this issue in future meetings, and will welcome suggestions from stakeholders. So those folks that aren't on the board that are listening into the call, how can we better reach folks? The third point of discussion, and I'm just going to hop into that one because I think people can comment on this as well, as it relates to increased outreach, is how do we better assist lower income applicants and applications with the process for grant applications and approvals and receipt of grant monies, including ways to address the match requirement. So general outreach, and then the specific issue of match for challenged communities and entities. So the discussion was good, but not extremely specific, which I think is probably just reflective of folks needing to kind of learn and understand what other organizations are doing, what other grant foundations are doing. And it, you know, kind of, I think that the next steps is really to ask VLCS staff to check in with other groups such as the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, who is working on urban and low income outreach for some of their new grant programs and support programs, and to help kind of hear from what other people are doing and develop a plan to reach and assist low income applicants. You know, the subcommittee didn't feel as though we had good answers, but know that there are great resources from which information can be gleaned and replicated and all of that. The second part of this is the 50% match requirement, which is a huge burden for low income and under-resourced organizations and communities. And VLCF staff indicated that reducing or eliminating the match would require legislative change. So as everybody can see, lots of consistency with making changes here. And for next steps, really with the 50% match, it's just to engage in a discussion about how folks are feeling about that threshold requirement. So I think we can discuss both of those options, general increased outreach, and then specifically how to reach lower income communities and applicants.
Thanks, Mary Carson. Any discussion on those items?
Mr. Secretary, just a quick comment. I really appreciate the effort both staff and the ad hoc committee put in terms of serving underserved groups. I'm a little concerned about changing the code to not have the 50% because kind of the whole point of that is to try to incentivize folks to bring matches to the table. There might be other ways of getting that match, like a separate fundraising effort to create a pool for underserved communities. So I just want to express my own concern about doing a code amendment to eliminate or reduce the 50% match requirement.
Thanks, Kat. Other comments? Okay, I would just say, you know, from the perspective of staff and the things that they can do, you know, with existing authority through outreach, we will absolutely work on those things. And there are some best practices out there, including the outreach work that we are going to be doing for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund grant round that was just announced. So absolutely want to do everything we can there to get the word out, and I think there'll be you know, more opportunities to think on and discuss further, you know, whether or not we want to do anything about the match. Mary Carson, you want to keep chugging?
Okay. All right. And then the next issue is there was discussion about the 2019 legislation that requires a full kind of list of ranked applicants be completed and provided to the General Assembly, which was, you know, intended to kind of influence appropriations and resources. And I just think that there, you know, there was a decently robust discussion of this issue, and I've been working hard to understand the background of this specific piece of legislation. And I think that for those people that might be new to the board or didn't have background knowledge, it might be helpful to hear how I've kind of broken down the issue. Even if you're not asking for it, I'm going to share how I feel about it. So I feel as though the issue is kind of a two-part issue. The first being that, as I mentioned, the legislation was intended to provide notice to legislators about the conservation needs of the Commonwealth. So the list of all the projects that could be funded if there were unlimited resources available to VLCF, and certainly full funding to VLCF. So introducing this idea of a ranked list would further incentivize legislators to increase VLCF funding if there's a project located in their specific district that was ranked lower on the list. So it would, you know, incentivize more money. And, you know, currently the kind of stakeholder concern that I've been hearing is that the legislators aren't fully aware that the list exists and, you know, might not be aware of the intent of the legislations. So we want them to be excited about getting full funding for VLCF. So that's kind of the concern, that that intention of the legislation isn't being satisfied. I have spoken with Secretary Strickler, who explained to me that the list is distributed through a press release to all legislators, and that the list and the specific needs in dollar amount is presented during all the money committees. So I think that, you know, this is great and good outreach, certainly to make legislators aware of the great conservation funding needs across the Commonwealth. But in the subcommittee meeting and in some prior discussions, or, you know, later discussions, it, you know, might be a helpful next step that we suggest, you know, just a little bit more. And one recommendation in particular that I came up with that folks may or may not like is to send the list directly via email to the legislators that have a pre-application application in their district. So it would just be one extra step of shooting an email and saying, hey, check out this list. There's a project in your district. You know, you should be aware of it. So that was kind of the recommendation for how to address the part one issue, which is legislative intent of making sure legislators know what the need is so they'll be inspired to fund VLCF more fully. The second part of this kind of larger issue is how the pre-application process was created to satisfy the requirements of the legislation, which is to create this ranked list. And I've had great discussion with staff, Sue in particular, about how the pre-application came to be and what's possible and not possible. And I think that what is a little bit confusing and could be helped is that the pre-application process doesn't exactly match up with the real application process, and this is creating some confusion because what is produced in the ranking is not the actual ranking that would be used for ranking of real awards. And the recommendation would be just to make that pre-application ranking match the actual application ranking. So it's a better reflection of what could happen during the actual grant round. And that could occur through, potentially simplifying the pre-application details. So it's, like an easier lift. Now I know that there's some concern from staff that this would require additional meetings for approval of a ranking process, which is something that would need to be discussed. But hopefully it's something that could be, modified without the need for additional meetings. And if it is something that additional meeting is needed, if it's one, is that okay? So that's kind of my summation of the issue. And those are the recommendations that we've come up with. And I think that discussion would be great. If any of the subcommittee meeting members feel as though I didn't portray that situation accurately, please feel free to correct me.
All right, questions or comments on that topic? I'll just say, Mary Carson, that I think our team has been doing its level best to live up to its requirements under the statute, and we certainly understand the value of this process and this requirement. I did, as I mentioned, present this information in front of the Chairman Marsden's subcommittee as well as the House Appropriations Subcommittee going into General Assembly session last year. And I see Jason Powell on the call with Senate Finance. I know he's gotten this information as well, but certainly I'm happy to try to get that out a little more broadly. At the same time, we need the help of folks who are interested in this program to get the word out to. There are a lot of folks on this board and out in the nonprofit community who have more extensive email lists and a lot of contacts that I don't have. So if you want people to be aware, you individually all have tools to help them become aware in addition to what we can do. So that's all I have to say, but certainly happy to keep working with our team at DCR to make processes more transparent and consistent.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Any other comments about the notification issue and then the pre-application kind of matchup?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one piece of information. When we work to develop the pre-application process, one of our goals in working with all of the land trusts and whatnot was to, and Mr. Secretary, you might recall we had this very discussion of our goal was to keep that pre-application process as simple as possible, because we wanted applicants to just really give us a high level summary without getting into into too much detail. Really, the whole point was to be able to have a quantitative way of expressing the need and the demand out there. And with that goal in mind, again, we tried to keep that pre-application process as user-friendly as possible. And that I will say that's the one thing that I've heard from folks that have done the pre-applications is they appreciated the simplicity of that application process. And so whatever we might do moving forward, I would hope that we would keep that goal in mind as well, though.
Yes, and I've heard feedback about the pre-application process not being a insane lift. So I do think that people appreciate that it is truncated. But I do think that if we can match the ranking criteria so it is a better match, that might be more helpful.
We will certainly take a look at it. In the interest of time, I'd like to keep moving unless there's any other pressing comments on this topic.
Okay. Next was the subcommittee discussed the oversubscription of the open spaces category of the VLCF grant program. This is something that has come up a lot, and so no surprise that that was part of what we discussed. And then really what we discussed in next steps was just recommend having a board discussion, which was specifically, recommended by the subcommittee members. And this addressing the issue of the oversubscription of the open space category will require a statutory change. And this is an issue that should be, I think we recommend, tackled at a future board meeting rather than taking up the time of this meeting, because it's a big lift. Okay. The last is that public comment should be heard before the board takes action on grants, and we've already done that. So that's wonderful. Thank you, staff, for making that change, and we really appreciate it. And this will be repeated in the future, so that's wonderful. And that was all that the subcommittee talked about. We did talk about a lot, and I thank you for the time to report out.
All right. Well, thank you, Mary Carson. I appreciate that readout. I'm going to go ahead and move along just to make sure that we stay on track here, but really appreciate all the work that the subcommittee has done, and look forward to future discussions on these and other related topics. Next, we'll have Larry Mickelson with DCR give us an update on the past VLCF grant rounds that have recently closed. Larry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. There have only been 2 grants that have closed since the February meeting, which I will report on, and also 1 grant which was withdrawn at the time of the grant agreement. The first is a Department of Forestry property, a very large property of 1,658 acres in Highland County. The Department of Forestry acquired an easement over this large property, which is very high land, 12th highest peak in Virginia, Jack Mountain. There are 8 significant natural heritage resources, including two G2 S1 element occurrences. And this property falls within the natural habitat and ecosystem diversity category of Conserve Virginia. The property at the very high elevations produces or supports red spruce, which is a little bit unusual and only grows on high altitude locations. It also protects a significant water source, which is the headwaters of the James River, 3,100 feet of intermittent streams flowing out of the mountains into the Bull Pasture River. So this is a very significant and large easement. Secondly, the Virginia Outdoors Foundation acquired an easement over the Mechania property in Lexington, which is a 39-acre property, and the easement allows public access along an existing trail to the Maury River. It's a significant property in that it's visible from U.S. Bike Route 76 and the Chessie Trail, a heavily used public trail across the river. And one of the significant things about the property is that it has huge limestone cliffs, sinkholes, and barrens, and is a part of the Barrens and Bluffs Conservation Site along the river there. So it's very significant, and we're very pleased that this easement now allows public access to the river, to a natural beach area along the river. It is within the water quality improvement category of Conserve Virginia. Lastly, there was one project that the board just approved back in February. It was a public access to the Rappahannock River in Culpeper County, along with existing campgrounds and such, nature trails and all. But at the time that we provided the grant application to the county for signature, we received a letter back from the county administrator saying that the Board of Supervisors respectfully has determined that the project is no longer viable due to increased concern of adjoining and community property owners. So we weren't able to move forward with the grant agreement, and I believe Sue will be asking the board to pick up that money and utilize it elsewhere. So that's my report, unless there are questions.
Got it. Thanks, Larry. Any questions for Larry? All right. Hearing none, Larry, thank you. And thanks to Department of Forestry and Vlcf for successfully closing out those two grant projects. Next, we'll have an update from DCR and Sharon Partee on the Land Conservation Fund. Sharon.
Yes, good morning. And I have a presentation to share real quickly. I'll try to get that up. Okay, wonderful, thank you. Again, the last financial update was actually in September due to, trying to limit what we talk on during our electronic meetings. So I'm going to actually discuss things that have happened since that last update. So I will go over first our unrestricted funding, and I'm not going to go over everything that's presented here. A lot of this is for historical purposes, just so that you can either tie back numbers to prior sessions or prior meetings. And but I will be touching on what we've done since September, which are going to be mostly focused on the FY21 items. So I will start. And so FY21, we've already talked about the last time that we received the $4.5 million in appropriation. And since then, we have received the additional 5.5 that we have already been working on for grant rounds. And so we've had that in our income come in FY21. When we last met, we had not received any interest on the fund at the time. And since then, we have received $65,376, and we still have another quarter's interest to come in this fiscal year, which ends June 30th. On to disbursements. That's all in the income section. I'll move down to this disbursements in FY21, which started in July, but since our last meeting, we have processed out all of the stewardship payments that we received at the end of FY20. We have not received our FY21 stewardship funding yet, and we anticipate hearing about what that's going to look like in the coming weeks, as we're quickly approaching the end of our fiscal year. But you'll see that we put out the $2.1 million in stewardship funding. And FY21 grant payments, as you move down through the disbursements, we have, since the last meeting, put out another $1.5 million in grant round or in grant payments, for a total of $1,536,852. Let's see, the next thing we've done since the last meeting is we have put out payments the last week. And then moving on to the administrative expenses for FY21, we have put out a total, or incurred a total of $216,429 in administrative expenses. that were previously approved to be done through this fund, utilizing this fund. And it gets us, and I'm hoping you can see the bottom, it's the $12.4 million is what we still have left on hand at the end of May 31st. So this is the last fiscal month that we've closed. So we're currently working in June now, but wanted to give the last fully closed month for the accounting period. So that is all with our unrestricted funding. I'll move next on to our restricted funding. This came from our mitigation funding that we received. And again, just focusing on what's transpired since September in fiscal year 21, you'll see that we have received our interest in this fund as well. Again, yet another quarter to go, and we received $34,493. Moving down into the disbursements, we have put out a total of $4 million roughly in grant payments and administrative expenses for FY21. We have incurred $178,569. Again, that was previously approved expenses that were allowed through the funding. And then that puts us at 1.9 million roughly left in that fund to be spent. And that is all I have to share unless anyone has any questions.
Just one quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just for my own edification, what is the interest rate we're using or earning at?
So unfortunately, they do not share with us the current interest rate. That is all calculated by the Department of Accounts and distributed to us. So unfortunately, we only know what we receive actually in funding, but I'm not familiar, or they have not shared what the current rate is.
Follow up there to Kat's good question. The next item on the agenda is a DCR request to spend the interest that's generated by the fund. So can we kind of hindcast and figure that out?
Is that something, I believe, Sue, are you going to be speaking on the request to spend the interest?
Yes. Yes. The next item on the agenda is the request to spend interest from the unrestricted fund, the state funding, which is provided for in the Code of Virginia. But I don't know what the interest rate is either. We can check and see. Is that something you've asked before, Sharon, and they just don't tell us, or?
Yeah, I can certainly look into it and see if they will provide it to us. But they just have not in the past shared that information with us.
Okay, awesome.
All right, yeah, I mean, it'd be good to have that information.
Sure.
Thanks. Any questions, other questions for Sharon before we go to Sue? All right, Sharon, thank you so much for that overview and for keeping our finances straight. Sue, we will go to you now for the next action item.
Okay, thank you. This was just a request for administrative funding for FY22. It's a request to cover the costs incurred at DCR for support staff and database related expenses and other administrative expenses that are incurred for $230,000. So this would require a motion.
Okay, any discussion on this or questions for Sue before we entertain a motion?
Just one quick question, Secretary Strickler, to Sue is, so I wasn't doing good math.
or if conservation fund. Of course, we'll be accruing interest as of July 1.
Yeah, I'm here. So the amounts that I have on the presentation are just what we've received in this year. I don't have an accumulated amount right now that is still left available based on our prior approval of spend, but I can certainly get back that information. So in the restricted fund, and what was received in this year was $65,000, and unrestricted there was $35,000 received. But that doesn't mean that what we've received previously isn't still within the fund.
Okay, we can get that balance though. Yeah. Kat, we can get that balance and share that information.
I think I'm just wanting to make sure that we have that much interest to put the 230 and what's, I've always believed it's good to have a little rainy day set aside. So, you know, what this 230 takes away from the total and what the remainder is, I think it'd be important for the board and staff to know.
Sure. Sue and Sharon, hi, this is Tom Smith. Current balance, Sharon, is a little over $313,000.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Tom. And just a follow-up here. Seems like we're proposing to spend significantly more for FY22 on administrative expenses out of this fund than we took in over the last year. Can somebody just explain how that's going to continue to allow us to be balanced in the future?
Sharon or Tom?
This Secretary Clyde here. I was just going to point out, first of all, this is for fiscal year 22. So we're coming in with a balance of over 300,000. We will continue to take in additional interest over FY22. So we certainly have much more than the 230 that's being proposed. And you know, after fiscal year 22's over, we'll reconcile. In other words, we have I think Tom said 315,000 or so going in. We're going to continue to earn more within FY22, and we're proposing only to spend 230. So even with that, we'll already have a positive balance going into FY23, since we're only proposing to spend 230 with a balance of 315 plus additional revenue coming in.
Got it. Thanks, Clyde. I guess my only follow-up is I assume that this 230 is going to be and has been a relatively stable cost of running the program in the past and going forward. Are you confident that we're going to continue to bring in enough revenue to cover these costs in the out years?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Secretary. One of the things I'll point out to the board is, as you all will recall, and thanks to our partners in the General Assembly, we have more money coming into the fund now. And as Sharon pointed out in her report, you saw a balance coming in, I believe, around 7 million. You see a balance going out of 12-13 million. As you all know, these projects that you'll be awarding later today, they have generally up to 2 years to come to fruition, with the potential for an additional third year. So while all of the balance is obligated, it does take time for these projects to come to fruition and pay out. And so with the addition, I mean, we have more money coming in from the appropriation now than we ever have. And then we'll have more money sitting in the fund to go, until obviously it's obligated to these projects, but these are reimbursements. So the money doesn't go out until the project's done. So with that cash flow, Mr. Secretary, I'm quite confident that we'll continue to have these types of resources to work with. And again, I think that the simple math would be 230 was probably only about what we have available now.
Adam, I have to talk.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Clyde. That's really helpful. Is there any other discussion on this?
I just want to add to Clyde's statement is that we would monitor and adjust our administrative spend if we saw a decline in the balance and the interest. We certainly, even though there would be an approval to spend at that level, would not go above that and would seek other funding if needed to cover those costs.
Got it. Thanks, Sharon. Albert, were you about to jump in?
Yes, just move to approve.
Second.
Bob Lazaro.
Motion made and seconded. Mike, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Secretary Strickler.
Aye.
Ms. Stiff.
Aye.
Ms. Hertz.
Aye.
Mr. Pollard.
Aye.
Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Volk.
Aye.
Ms. Imhoff.
Aye.
Ms. Booth.
Hi, and please let the record show that I am present and I apologize for being late.
Yes, ma'am. I saw you come in. Thank you. Ms. Presley. Mr. Presley.
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro.
Aye.
Mr. Woodley.
Aye.
Senator Marsden. Senator Stewart.
Aye.
Ms. Andrews.
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much. Sticking with Sue here, we've got an update for the fiscal plan for the FY21 Grant Round 2 awards. It sounds like we need to approve reallocating those return grant funds to the open space and parks category. But Sue, I'll let you explain this with us.
Okay. Let me see here. Okay. Here's the expenditure plan for this FY21 round 2, going into our grant round here and awarding grants. We had, I can't see my screen. This is so funny. Okay, we had the appropriation of the 5.5 million, and then we had the reallocation of unspent grant funding at our February meeting, when we're asking for the $210,000 that was returned in open spaces and parks to be reallocated back into that category so that we can award that in this current grant round. So that would be what we need for you all to approve so that we can go forward with the grant awards.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman. Bob Lazaro.
Kat Imhoff, second.
All right, motion and second. Any discussion before we call the roll? All right, Mike, it's all you.
Secretary Strickler.
Aye.
Ms. Stiff.
Aye.
Ms. Hertz.
Aye.
Mr. Pollard.
Aye.
Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Volk.
Aye.
Ms. Imhoff.
Aye.
Ms. Booth.
Aye.
Mr. Presley. Mr. Lazaro. I'm sorry, my connection went out again. Mr. Presley.
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro.
Aye.
Mr. Woodley.
Aye.
Senator Marsden.
Aye.
Senator Stewart.
Aye.
Ms. Andrews.
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Sue. Next, we are going to have the interagency team presentations for recommended projects for FY21 grant round 2. We will have an opportunity after the interagency presentations, but before a motion is offered for public comment and questions. So please keep that in mind. Anybody who wants to get a public comment in while the discussion is going on, please use the chat feature and we'll call on you at the appropriate time. I believe first up is recommendations for the agriculture and forest land categories. I believe Carl Didier from DOF is going to do both of these presentations today. Is that right, Carl?
That is correct, Secretary Strickler.
All right, it's all you.
Let me get my screen oriented here. You seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, but it's not in presentation mode.
Layout.
Yeah. But we can, if you wanted to do it from this, we can see the main slide.
Well, the Wi-Fi seems working, but I don't know where that's coming from.
DCR Wi-Fi is still not connecting.
I'm actually getting what I'm getting here, but
I can get it. Hold on a second, Susan. Sorry, I'm the first one here.
maybe DCR is capitalized. Try it.
Oh no, the password was correct.
Oh, okay.
It's just not.
Brian, you're not muted.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out my screen. Is that better?
Yep, we've got it.
My screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. Oops, that's the wrong category. Hold on a moment. All right. Keep having. Farmlands. Super apologies, guys. All right, that should have it. I just wanted to thank Secretary Strickler and the board for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll be standing in for Jen Perkins, who is on a well-deserved vacation. I'm not entirely familiar with these projects, but based on Jen's notes, I will try to respond to any questions you may have, or may have to ask my Vlcf colleagues for a little help. There were 5 applications to the farmland preservation category in this round. We are recommending funding 4 of them, 2 at their fully requested amount and 2 partially. The first top scoring project is Falkland Dairy, a Virginia Outdoors Foundation project, and we are recommending $500,000 in funding. The property is 906 acres and is located in Cumberland County. It intersects with 3 different layers of conserved Virginia agricultural, natural habitat and ecosystem diversity, and water quality. The farm is one of the last 2 dairies in Cumberland County, with 50% of the property containing prime soils and 29% containing soils of statewide importance. Wetland Dairy is a multi-generational century farm that has been in the family since 1848. The owners have been awarded the Clean Water Farm Award and the Forage and Grassland Council Award. In addition to 2 ponds and perennial streams, the farm fronts on the Appomattox River. This area is identified as significant for natural habitat and ecosystem diversity. The property is within the Piedmont Forest Block Important Bird Area as designated by the National Audubon Society. A portion of the Appomattox adjoining the property is included in the New Nature Conservancy's aquatic portfolio. Best management practices have been installed, including crop, cover crops, and tree planting in buffer areas, and they have an active nutrient management plan. The property is adjacent to approximately 8,700 acres of conserved land across the Appomattox River. It is also in close proximity to a 400-acre property that this family placed under easement last year. Protection of the property will maintain the historical setting for several structures, including the 1884 Centenary Church that is surrounded by the property, a boundary ditch dug by enslaved people on the property, and the environs around the 1700s home that served as a historic cabin. The second project we're recommending for funding was put forward by the Piedmont Environmental Council. We recommend funding it only at $208,000. This funding will leverage an anticipated $1.73 million in AIL funding and $782,000 in landowner contributions and private funding. The third project is located in Culpeper County and provides a significant return on investment by protecting a 732-acre Devon cattle farm along the 1-mile stretch of the Rappahannock River. The property intersects with 2 conserved Virginia layers, the cultural and historic preservation layer and the scenic preservation layer. And the property is adjacent to other conserved lands. The property is visible from the Rappahannock River, a state scenic river, and Freeman's Ford Road, which is a state scenic byway that contributes to the Journey Through the Hallowed Ground scenic byway. Freeman's Ford is also part of the Remington Community Partnership Bike Route. The property includes 80 acres of core and 570 acres of study area for the Rappahannock Station battlefield. 652 acres of the property are designated as prime soils or soils of statewide importance. The farm has been in the family since the early 1900s and is now a multi-generational operation raising organic grass-fed Devon cattle. The family uses rotational grazing among the other best management practices. In addition to pasture land, 286 acres of the property is in forest and is managed by the Department of Forestry for its stewardship management plan. The 1 mile of frontage along the Rappahannock River has been fenced to exclude livestock. The buffer is mostly forested and ranges from 80 to 180 feet from the river. The landowners have also voluntarily fenced the intermittent tributaries to the Rappahannock. These are revegetating naturally and range from 10 to 50 feet. The Lakota Ranch Farm Store is owned and operated on the property by the owners and sells meat, dairy, eggs, and produce. The farm also has a petting zoo adjacent to the store. The final project is Kevin Jones. Kevin Jones is a project proposed by Stafford County, to which we recommend awarding $46,250 in funding. Sorry, this isn't the final project, it's the second to last project. The property is 70 acres in Stafford County and is adjacent to the other conserved lands. The project is part of Stafford County's Purchase of Development Rights program. The farm is used for cropland and livestock pasturing. 54% of the property contains prime soils or soils of statewide importance. The landowner has fenced 2,400 feet of the Little Falls Run, which is a perennial stream running through the property. The farm also has 15 acres of forest land and almost 5 acres of high-quality wetland. The property lies within a DCR ecological core that could provide habitat for threatened species. The property can be viewed from the forest land road, a state scenic byway. Civil War activity occurred on the property, and the easement will preserve Civil War trenches. Finally, the Morse Brothers Farm is another VLF project, and we recommend funding it at its full $70,750. The project is 106 acres in Nelson County, the first Vlcf project in this locality. It is close to other conserved lands, including the James River State Park and James River Wildlife Management Area, and near an area identified on the Conserved Regional Natural Habitat and Ecosystem Diversity layer. The property is also entirely within the Audubon Society's Central Piedmont Important Bird Area. The Morse brothers are third generation Black farmers, and this property is adjacent to their existing farm. They purchased the property with the idea of developing a multifaceted operation that combines cattle and hay production, a small vineyard, and an event farm. The goal is to provide a destination for both locals and for visitors from the capital region. The prior owner recently clear-cut the property, and now the landowners are converting it to pasture land. Approximately 70 acres of the property contain prime soils or soils of statewide importance. The Morse brothers are working with NRCS to create pastures and fence streams to show best management practices. And the NRCS is currently developing a farm management plan. The land will also have trails for visitors to the winery and event space to turn them out into the streams and pastures of the Piedmont. The property contains 2 perennial streams that drain to the Tye River and a portion of the Tye that contains habitat for an endangered species. This project also offers significant return on investment and leverages federal funding from AIL, which is pending, state funding from the Virginia Outdoor Foundation's Preservation Trust Fund, and a partial landowner donation. While this property ranks a little lower on the statutory criteria for the farmland category, since the farm isn't yet in active production, funding this project supports other priorities of the Vlcf board. Any questions on the farmland category? Should we take questions now?
Let's keep moving and take questions at the end. But thank you for that that presentation. Next, we have. Sorry, let me get back to my point. Carrie Richardson is going to talk about the recommendations for the historic category, and then Jason Bullock and Crystal McKelvey from DCR will talk about the natural areas category.
Secretary Center said I do a forest preservation category. That first one is farmland.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, go ahead and do forests first. Sorry about that.
No problem. You should be able to see my screen for the forest category. We had 4 applications in this category and are recommending partial funding of the top 3 scoring applications. The top scoring project in this category was the Eastern Shore Forest Conservation Initiative, Phase 2 of that project. It represents a second, smaller phase of the same initiative that was funded in the previous grant round. The application was submitted by the Department of Wildlife Resources and scored 114 of 172 total points. For orientation, this map shows the location of the project on the Eastern Shore in Appomattox County. The blue polygons that you see are the approximately 8,800 acres in the phase 1 of this project, and the pink ones represent the 749 acres that would be protected in the current project. The project is a fee simple acquisition of land that will become fully publicly accessible wildlife management areas. As you can see from this map, the project now shown in red polygons intersects multiple conserved Virginia layers. The project is particularly important from the coastal resilience standpoint, as it has been explicitly designated to help facilitate natural marsh migration in the face of sea level rise. By protecting and improving over 690 acres of important wetlands, it will also help support populations of migratory birds who use these habitats for foraging and stopover sites. The wildlife management areas this project creates will also provide increased opportunities for the public to enjoy wildlife viewing, hunting, fishing, hiking, and other activities. The project is also incredibly valuable from the standpoint of protecting the Commonwealth working forest resource base. Nearly 3/4 of the property is considered high conservation value forest, composed of loblolly pine, mixed hardwoods, and forested wetlands. The forest will be sustainably managed in consultation with the Department of Forestry. The application requested $700,000 in funding. However, if we fully funded this project, it would make it difficult to complete the other two high-value projects in this category this round, which are in a totally different part of the state. Therefore, we recommend funding this project at $400,000, which DWR has already indicated is sufficient to complete the project, given several other potential sources of funding. The second scoring project in this category was the Three Creek Catherine project, a 376-acre purchase easement in Southampton County that would be held by the Department of Forestry. It scored 110 total points compared to the 114 points for the previous project, although the property is only half the acreage of the previous project. The application was prepared by the Department of Forestry in collaboration with a representative of the landowner. This 376-acre property intersects a substantial amount of the agriculture and forestry layer, specifically the forestry layer on conserved Virginia, shown in the orange color. The property is almost entirely forested, 75% of which is considered high conservation value forest by VLF. The project is particularly important as it conserves nearly 3 miles of water frontage, including over 1.8 miles of Three Creek, a tributary of the Nottoway River. It also protects nearly 300 acres of forested wetland, including large blocks of old growth cypress tupelo swamp. And it protects 75 acres of upland forest, much of which was recently replanted in loblolly pine that will be sustainably managed under a DOF approved management plan. The old growth cypress tupelo stands will be protected by a 200-foot no-cut buffer unless harvest is necessary to dollars in funding. The landowner's agent is seeking funding from Enviva to cover due diligence costs, and the balance of the project will be donated by the landowner. We recommended funding this project at $200,000. The landowner's agent has indicated that this would be sufficient for the landowner to agree to the easement. The last project in the forest preservation category, Round Hill Swamp, also scored close to the other two projects, scoring 106 compared to 114 for the highest scoring project. It is a purchased easement that, like the previous project in Southampton County, would be held by the Department of Forestry, and the application was prepared by DOF in collaboration with the landowner's representative. The property is 705 acres in size and intersects substantial amounts of the agricultural, natural habitat, floodplains, and water quality layers on conserved Virginia. The property is about 2/3 forested and 1/4 prime farmland, the orange color in the map above. 80% of the forest is considered high conservation value forest by the Department of Forestry. As with the previous project, much of the blue and yellow area on the western part of the property is forested wetland, containing nearly 140 acres of cypress tupelo swamp. The property has over 3 miles of water frontage, including over 2 miles of streams and a beautiful 9-acre lake. These Water bodies are about 2 miles upstream of the scenic Blackwater River and Antioch Pine State Natural Area Preserve, and will contribute to the water quality of both of these. Streams will be protected by 100-foot riparian buffers, and the cypress tupelo swamps will have a limit on canopy removal and a no clear cutting allowed. The 300+ acres of upland forest are a mixture of pine and hardwoods, and will be sustainably managed under a DOF approved management plan. A habitat protection area will also be created for several species of bats. The landowner is in the midst of estate planning and has 3 children. The easement will enable the extraction of equity to pay 2 heirs in cash and leave the farm and timberland intact with 1 owner. The total project cost is approximately $1.3 million. The application requested $275,000 in funding. We recommend funding in at $240,000, which the landowner's agent has indicated is sufficient for the landowner to agree to the easement. The balance of the project cost will be donated by the landowner. That's it from my angle. I'll turn it over.
Great, thanks, Carl, and apologies for cutting you off. Now we'll go over to Carrie Richardson, and then she'll be followed by Jason and Crystal.
Good morning. Can you see my screen? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. As Secretary Strickler said, I am Carrie Richardson. I am the Easement Program Specialist for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and I am happy to present the following recommended grant projects. There are 4 grant applications in the Historic Area Preservation category, and we are recommending fully funding 3 projects and partially funding 1 project. The first is the Drexel Moral Center in Powtown County. The applicant is Belmead on the James Incorporated. Located in northern Powtown County, the Drexel Moral Center contains approximately 56 acres and is partially within the cultural and historic preservation layer in conserved Virginia. The property includes the
I'm sorry to interrupt. Your slides aren't advancing, just to let you know. Okay.
They're not?
Not on ours, not on my screen.
Okay.
You're not in presentation mode.
Let's see. Is that working?
You might want to switch screens, move the screens from one to another.
We can see it. It's not in presentation mode, but we can see the pictures.
Okay. Okay. Is that better? At least you can see. Okay. The property includes the historic Rosemont House and Stable, a site that was listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places in 2008. Census DeSales Catholic School for African American girls located across the road from Rosemont. Other historic resources on the property include an early 20th century family cemetery. The Drexel Moral Center includes approximately 40 acres of forested land and 16 acres of open space land. The property features 780 feet of frontage on Lick Creek, a perennial stream that drains to the James River. The applicant, Belmead on the James Incorporated, plans to rehabilitate the Rosemont House for use as a museum detailing the history of the St. Francis de Sales Institute and its founders. The museum will also feature ancestry research and programs on racial equity and environmental justice, with an emphasis on serving underrepresented communities in Powhatan and surrounding counties. The property will also serve as a public park with a trail system and a 100-foot forested riparian buffer. The project is a fee acquisition with an historic preservation and open space easement to be held by the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The Interagency Task Force recommends fully funding the grant request at $228,450. The second project is the Rollins Tract on the Bristol Station battlefield in Prince William County. The 22.35 acre Rollins Tract is located in Prince William County near the town of Bristol. The property is characterized by a gently rolling topography and is bounded on the northwest by a railroad line and on the south by additional farmland. And it lies entirely within the cultural and historic preservation layer in conserved Virginia. The Rollins Tract is entirely within the core area of the Bristol Station battlefield, which has been given a preservation priority rating of 1.3 Class B by the Civil War Sites Advisory Commission. Priority 1 battlefields are those with a critical need for action. The property is also entirely within the core area of the Kettle Run battlefield. The Rollins Tract includes a 1930s farmhouse as well as 11 agricultural buildings. It contains approximately 1 acre of forested lands as well as 21 acres of open space land, almost all of which is used for agricultural purposes. The Rollins Tract also includes 410 feet of frontage on an unnamed perennial stream that drains to Broad Run. The Rollins Tract includes access to Bristow Road, a Virginia scenic byway, and the property is adjacent to 2 other properties previously acquired by the American Battlefield Trust. Like those properties, the Trust plans to convey an easement and then donate the Rollins Tract to Prince William County for use as a public battlefield park. This project is a fee acquisition with a historic preservation and open space easement to be held by the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The Interagency Task Force recommends fully funding the grant request at $285,000. Our third project is the Fussell's Mills Tract at 2nd Deep Bottom Battlefield in Henrico County. The applicant is the American Battlefield Trust. Located in eastern Henrico County, the Fussell's Mill Tracts contain approximately 52 acres of land. The smaller 2.3 acre tract is improved for residential purposes, while the larger 49.7 acre tract is unimproved and almost entirely under forested cover. The Fussell's Mill Tract lie entirely within the cultural and historic preservation layer and partially within the water quality improvement layer in conserved Virginia. The property is entirely within the core area of the 1864 2nd Deep Bottom Battlefield, which has a preservation priority rating of 1.3 Class B. Priority 1 battlefields are those with a critical need for action. The Fussell's Mill Tracts are also partially within the core and study areas of the 1st Deep Bottom Battlefield, partially within the study areas of the Glendale and the Fair Oaks and Darbytown battlefields. Additional historic resources on the property include a small cemetery. The larger tract includes 106 feet of frontage along Bailey Creek, a perennial stream that drains to the James River. The American Battlefield Trust will install trails and interpretive signage and open the property to the public. This project will be a fee acquisition project with a historic preservation and open space easement to be held by the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The Interagency Task Force recommends fully funding the project at $282,000. And our final application is the Edwards Tract at Port Republic Battlefield in Rockingham County. Located in southeastern Rockingham County, the Edwards Tract contains approximately 107 acres of land. The property is unimproved with a rolling terrain and approximately 105 acres of dense forest. The Edwards Tract intersects with the natural habitat and ecosystem diversity and the water quality improvement layers in conserved Virginia. The Edwards Tract is partially within the core and study areas of the Port Republic Battlefield, which has a preservation priority rating of 2.2 Class B. Battlefields with a priority rating of 2 are those that are in relatively good condition with opportunities for comprehensive preservation. The Edwards Tract includes significant frontage along an unnamed tributary of the South Fork of the Shenandoah River and is adjacent to other lands held by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. The Edwards Tract will be open to the public year-round and interpreted as part of the Port Republic Battlefield. This project will be a fee acquisition with an historic preservation and open space easement to be held by the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The Interagency Task Force recommends partially funding the grant request at $29,550, which is the remaining amount left in the historic area preservation category after fully funding the top 3 projects. And that is all I have for you today. I will hand it over.
Thanks, Terry. Jason, you ready to go?
I am. I'm going to show you. Okay. One sec.
Mr. Secretary, this is Glenda Booth. Are you having board comments and questions after presentations of all the applications? Is that correct?
Yes, Ms. Booth, that's accurate.
Everyone see this okay? Okay. Can everyone see this and hear me?
Yes. Yeah, looks good, Jason.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Strickler, and good morning to the board. And thanks for the opportunity to share these 6 proposed projects for the natural areas category. Were the first listed in or presented in order, descending order of score and rank, where the first 5 could be fully funded and the 6th partially funded. Having trouble getting these to advance.
I think that happened to me the last time.
Is everyone just using their arrow keys for this?
I was, Jason.
Okay, here we go. So the first project is Pickett's Harbor Maritime Forest and Migratory Bird Habitat Protection. I don't know, there must be a delay. Hopefully it's just a delay. Okay, for this project, as you can see on the map here, it intersects several Conserve Virginia categories, but I won't repeat those for every one of these projects, but just add other information. In addition to the Conserve Virginia values, it protects habitat and a known population of northeastern beach tiger beetle, a state and federally listed threatened species, 2 significant natural community types, North Atlantic mixed dune grassland, loblolly pine, sand, heather, dune woodland, as well as critical migratory bird stopover habitat. And the 2 conservation sites in play here have biodiversity ranks of B2 and B3. For conservation site, B ranks 1 is highest and B5 is lowest. Also values here are important buffer to Pickett's Harbor State Natural Area Preserve. There on the map, it's hatched. And you'll see the little semicircle shape between these parcels. That's a cul-de-sac. in a development, these two parcels, if not protected, would almost certainly be developed. But another benefit here is that this cul-de-sac via ownership would provide official access to the preserve for management, as well as public access as appropriate. Here's just a few photos of some of the resources there. This is the shoreline from the property. An example or a photo of the dune grassland with the sand heather, as well as the northeastern beach tiger beetle, which again are on the subject property. There's also a freshwater outlet emptying out into the bay from here, from the property boundary between the Silver Tract to the left and the natural area preserve to the right. The Silver Tract is the subject parcel. And there's a ponded natural wetland along this outlet. Some interesting historic information. Pigot's Hole was used as far back as the early 1700s as an anchorage location on the shore. This pond was formed by millions of years of sand accumulation and dune building, which essentially impounded this freshwater source of water. But this pond drain has persisted as a drain out into the bay. And so it was an important source of fresh water, in addition to a location for anchorage. And then in 1890, the governor approved Pickett's Hole as a wharf location. Second project is also adjacent to Pickett's Harbor Natural Area Preserve. Project's called Lake Allure Woods. Again, there are two conservation sites in play here, a B2 and B3, the same conservation sites due to proximity. This is also important migratory bird stopover habitat here, as intact maritime loblolly pine and hardwood forest, which is critically important on the shore in this migratory bird stopover area. There's also importance here for buffer and access for the public and management. Here's some photos of Lake Allure, known as the largest natural freshwater lake on the eastern shore, as well as the maritime forest, predominantly loblollies that are on the tract. We don't know of any historic resource inventory that's been done there, but and it's not necessarily relevant to this category, but very interesting. We would expect Native American use of a freshwater lake like this on the eastern shore, and these are just some artifacts that were collected on the property by the current owner of the property. And a common snapping turtle, one of the species of greatest conservation need as well, expected in Lake Allure. I believe this actually was taken on a site visit. The third project is in addition to Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve, Accokeek Bottomlands. This is a 52-acre fee simple addition to Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve. It intersects with an essential Crow's Nest conservation site of B rank 2. It includes portions of a C3 ranked forested ecological core, 41 acres of wetlands. It has a high threat rank in the development vulnerability model. This also, just because it will add to a protected more than 3,000 acre landscape of forest within a predominantly developed Northern Virginia landscape, is of critical importance for migratory bird stopover habitat. And also it would provide key visual and ecological buffer along Raven Road, which leads to one of the public access points for Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve. Just an example of the hardwood forests on the property, as well as a photo of the largest, I believe that's a tulip poplar that is on the subject tract. It's a photo of Accokeek Creek channel that is on the property. Accokeek Creek provides the northern boundary of the Crow's Nest Peninsula, where the southern boundary is by Potomac Creek. Remnants of what was undoubtedly some former structure on the subject tract, which is interesting, but no real information on what that may have been, but we would think that it is likely related to the former sawmill operation that was in and around Crow's Nest. And the photo on the right is not from the subject property, but nearby. This was the former residence of the Bowling family who operated that sawmill operation. The two projects from the Cedars, the first of which in Southwest Virginia, Lee County, the first of which is Kinzer Hollow Cave. This is a 77-acre fee simple addition to the Cedars Natural Area Preserve. To those who aren't familiar or haven't heard in meetings about where we've discussed projects before, the Southwest Virginia is considered the most biodiverse part of the state, and it's because it checks all the boxes in biodiversity. You've got terrestrial flora and fauna. You've got globally recognized high biodiversity and aquatic resources like fish and mussels in the Clinch and Powell River watersheds, as well as cave and karst resources. So due to the subterranean habitat and this karst landscape, there are lots of globally rare species as well. So on this tract, there is the globally rare Powell Valley terrestrial cave isopod, several rare plants. It's anticipated to be of value for gray bat foraging along the Powell River. And again, there's a cave on the tract that drains to the Powell River, which supports a host of rare, threatened, and endangered species and species of greatest conservation need. And the acquisition of these tracts will provide long needed management access to better enable us to use prescribed fire management on the adjacent Dry Creek Barrens tract of the Cedars. Just a couple of shots of the rare plants there. On the left is white blue-eyed grass, Cystarincum albetum, and on the right is eastern false aloe, also known as rattlesnake master, Manfreda virginica. Interesting that Cystarincum is Greek, and it's built of the words cis and rinkos, which translates to pig snout, because the tubers of this plant were known to be very delicious by foraging pigs, and albetum means white. And though this is called a grass, it's actually closer related to an iris, and therefore relative to grasses, instead of being wind pollinated, it actually has some pollinator values as well. And the rattlesnake master there on the right is actually predominantly or most abundant in the Midwestern United States, but has for centuries occurred as part of Virginia's native flora, though much rarer here. And there's some emerging theory now that it could be that thousands of years ago, Native Americans may have aided its eastward movement in their trade for medicinal purposes. It's still very rare in Virginia. It's definitely a part of our native flora. But this is a theory that we've been hearing more about. Here's a shot of a limestone barren on the adjacent protected land that we'll now be able to better manage with prescribed fire. The other project from the Cedars, the Northeast Edition, 63 acres and fee simple addition. A lot of the biodiversity values I just mentioned on the other tracts pertain here as well. So the subject tract supports, again, several rare plants, caves, and groundwater quality for the Powell River. This was one of the first identified conservation priorities by the Natural Heritage Program in the 1990s. And in some of the earlier visits, I've included this quote here from retired Professor Dr. Doug Ogle from Virginia Highlands Community College, who said that he was awed by what he saw there and saw no other site with the diversity and numbers in the immediate area. So here's a photo of the Powell River. And also this image on the right is a map showing the clear intersect of this of 4 different conservation sites with this tract, and it is the key to all 4. The overlap in conservation sites really is driven by the fact that biodiversity here is so high, and as I mentioned before, you know, conservation sites are delineated based on subterranean resources as well as terrestrial above ground resources. So a key tract at the nexus of several significant conservation sites. One of the rare plants here is called running glade clover. This is a critically imperiled plant globally. It is on this tract, and this map on the left is the current known distribution of this plant species, known from only 4 locations in the world. Here's a couple of shots of the habitat there. This is an example of the ecological restoration that would take place on the property. To the left here, you see pre-prescribed fire, and to the right, post-prescribed fire. And you can just, basically, it shows you the reemergence of a native understory flora. And the last project is an addition to Poor Mountain, the Northeast edition. In fact, here outlined in red, this really takes the preserve to the northeast up to 12 o'clock Knob Road, which is a great boundary for management, for access. This is a 77-acre fee simple addition. Poor Mountain includes the world's largest population of a globally imperiled pirate bush, which is also on this subject tract. Here's a couple of photos of pirate bush. Pirate bush is a member of the sandalwood family. It grows in clumps. It'll grow to about 15 feet high. And interesting about this species, going back to some of your intro to botany past, is it's a dioecious plant, which means that a shrub, an individual, is either female or male. So it both sexes are needed to produce fruit. And these fruits here in the photos are about these inch-long torpedoes, a lot like a cherry. It's got a fleshy surrounding on a single stony seed. It's called a drupe. But interestingly, this plant is called a pirate bush because it is kleptoparasitic. It has specialized roots called houstonia that basically tap into the roots from other plants and take nutrients from them. The left photo is, you see there's a little marker on the tree in the left. This is looking essentially north. Where the existing preserve is to the left. And the tract extends down the ridgeline in front to the knob that's in the background. And then the photo on the right is from that knob in the background, showing that scenic value there. And lastly, just interesting also that this property has been known by locals for a long time as having a water source that's accessible just off 12 o'clock Knob Road. Apparently in an area with high natural iron concentrations in groundwater, and this spring is lacking that. So it's been a source of better drinking water that people in the locals have used for a very long time. And I'll stop there and pass it on and take any questions when we're all done.
Thank you, Jason. Crystal, you want to go ahead with your presentations?
And just a quick sound check, thumbs up.
You're a little faint, Crystal.
Okay, let me change my settings. Is that any better? Can you hear me better? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me see if I can. All right. So good morning, Secretary Strickler, Director Chrisman, members of the board and colleagues. I am Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Recreation Grants Manager in the Planning and Recreation Resources Division of DCR. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge my colleague, Kelly Seaton, Recreation Grants Program Planner, whom was instrumental in this process during this grant round. And just to check, you can see my screen. Okay. So for the open spaces and parks category, 15 applications were received, and after scoring, the top 5 have been recommended for funding. Here I present an overview of these 5 proposed projects in order of ranking. Funding recommendations are based on a decreasing percentage of the requested amount, totaling the full amount of available funding. The first project is the Blackwater Conservation Acquisition, and this is being applied for by the City of Franklin Parks and Recreation and is 203 acres. This property intersects 4 conserved Virginia layers, including natural habitat, floodplains, scenic preservation, and water quality improvement. The property contains old-growth hardwood bottomlands, cypress tupelo forests, and other significant rare natural communities. There's also over 5,000 linear feet along the Blackwater River, which is a designated boat launch. Potential project partners include Ducks Unlimited, Vlcf Preservation Trust Fund, and Enviva Trust Forest Conservation Fund. The committee task force proposes $168,500 in Vlcf funding. Second is the Haskins Creek Waterfront Land Acquisition in Tappahannock. This is being applied for by the Middle Peninsula Chesapeake Bay Public Access Authority and contains 6.91 acres. This intersects the floodplains and flooding resilience conserved Virginia layer and is located near land needed for water quality improvement. This site contains an existing dock allowing visitors access to Haskins Creek, which leads directly to a potential scenic river, the Rappahannock River, which is designated as the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Water Trail. More than 75% of the property is natural wetland vegetation. Recreation opportunities include a car-top boat launch with parking and a family outdoor gathering area. This will provide public recreation opportunities for the town of Tappahannock, which is highly socially vulnerable as per the CDC index, and will increase tourism for travelers seeking public water access while also meeting needs of the Essex County Comprehensive Plan. This project has much local support, and the IAT recommends $200,000 of Vlcf funding. Third is the South Garden International LLC Public Access Land Expansion, also being applied for by the Middle Peninsula Chesapeake Bay Access Authority and contains 125.59 acres. This parcel intersects with floodplains and flooding resilience conserved Virginia layers and offers natural habitat, ecosystem diversity, cultural and historic preservation, conservation values. This property is also adjacent to the already conserved Captain Sinclair Recreation Area of over 122 acres, protected by a VOF conservation easement. This land may have once been part of a Native American fishing village. This area is 10 miles downriver from the site of Powtown's primary village of Werowocomoco and northeast from the Catlin Island and near the newly opened Machicomoco State Park. The South Garden International parcel largely consists of natural vegetation, pristine tidal wetlands, and an upland forested area essential for wildlife and bird habitat. The dense submerged aquatic vegetation surrounding the property also provides habitat for a variety of fish as well as blue crabs. Residents and visitors of the Middle Peninsula will be able to enjoy access to the outdoors via Johns Point Gloucester Blue Ways Trail for paddlers, as well as the opportunity to expand outdoor education experiences. The IAT recommends funding of $312,000 for this project. Fourth, the Nottoway River Wildlife and Recreation Area is being applied for by the Conservation Fund and consists of 1,597 acres in Sussex County. This parcel intersects the scenic preservation, agriculture and forestry, and natural habitat and ecosystem diversity conserve Virginia layers, while also near land for flooding resilience. This property is adjacent to a property under VOF conservation easement and across the road from an easement held by the Board of Historic Resources. The proposed Nottoway River Wildlife and Recreation Area includes 2.5 miles of frontage on the Nottoway River, which is a designated scenic river, and the intention is to transfer the property to the Department of Wildlife Resources for protection as a wildlife management area to provide restoration opportunity for longleaf pine and protect critical wetland habitat. Recreation opportunities include fishing, hunting, kayaking, hiking, and wildlife viewing. This meets a featured conservation project for the Crater region in the Virginia Outdoors Plan to improve woodland and water-oriented recreation access in Sussex County. The IAT recommends $264,500 in Vlcf funding. Lastly, the green at the Science Museum of Virginia is being applied for by the Virginia Outdoors Fund. This is 5.2 acres in size in the city of Richmond. This unique project intersects the cultural and historic preservation conserve Virginia category. There are several historic resources nearby, including the Branch House on the Virginia Landmarks Register and National Register of Historic Places, as well as the William Byrd Hotel, which both hold historic preservation easements. The Virginia Outdoors Foundation and Science Museum of Virginia propose an innovative partnership that will allow the museum to convert a surface parking lot at Broad Street Station into an urban park to be protected in perpetuity as an open space. This will demonstrate science-based natural solutions to the effects of climate change while addressing the growing need for open green space in an area under intense development pressure. The Science Museum and co-located Children's Museum attracted more than 700,000 visitors in 2019 and is also in one of the busiest public transit corridors of the city. More than 5,000 residents live within a half-mile from the site in densely populated neighborhoods. This will provide free access to all and would be the only public park along the 7-mile Pulse corridor. The vision for the Green is to become a living demonstration site for natural solutions to urban challenges and has sought community input to develop the plans that would incorporate native and beneficial tree plantings, walking paths, public art, and gathering spaces, while also providing opportunity for citizen science education focused on urban heat vulnerability study called RV Air. The IAT proposes funding this at $90,000. Thank you for the opportunity to present these 5 projects totaling $1,035,000 in Vlcf funding, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal, and also Carrie and Jason. I know there was a lot to get through, but I think it was good to just roll there. And now let's check Gina. Are there any public comments that that folks want to make, or can we open it up for public comment for a minute?
Yeah, we had a few come in. There was one question about some projects being recommended for 100% of their funding, and Sue answered that in the chat already by clarifying that state agencies are eligible for 100% of funding for projects. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. There was also a question about the manual having an emphasis on larger tracts.
This is for forest tracts, just to be clear.
Okay, related to forest tracts in particular, being aware that there are some very good projects that are less than 100 acres that might not rank as highly then. I don't know if there's comments on that.
Probably the most of the amendments in the manual this time around seem to be circling around the issue of forest tract
conservation, and I just made that observation that there are some less than 100-acre ones that are pretty good. And the other consequence might tend to be that you're going to end up with relict industrial forest properties as scoring higher for that reason.
Thanks for that comment, Carl, or someone from forestry. Do you want to respond?
Perhaps it's best to address that question when we talk about the changes to the manual. I don't disagree that the changes to the manual will tend to favor larger projects that conserve larger amounts of forest and high conservation value forest. It doesn't mean that there's not space for smaller projects that should be less expensive and can potentially fit in. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, we'll hold the broader discussion of that for the grant manual conversation.
That's fine.
All right. On that note, there was another question about the manual and referencing Conserve Virginia. So maybe we want to hold on to that until.
Yeah, there's going to be another opportunity for public comment after the proposed grant manual is presented.
Great.
Fair enough. It looked like that was taking place after the vote on the changes, though, given the way the agenda was set up.
That's not what I have on my notes, so I will assure you that we will have public comment before a vote is taken.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Great. There was an interest in seeing the map that Sue has since pulled up, which shows the location of the different projects by category and also shows which ones were not recommended for funding. And then there was a comment about seeking more information on the public access for the Eastern Shore Forest Conservation Initiative track. Are we ready to get into some specifics about that?
I think that's appropriate. There's someone who can answer. I think that question was from Jay Ford. Is there anybody who can respond to Jay's question?
This is Becky Glenn with the Department of Wildlife Resources. Happy to answer that question. The properties that have been included in this proposal will be like other DWR properties, open 24 hours, 365 days, unless there's a need for seasonal closure related to the conservation or protection of rare species or some unique feature on the properties. Given what we know about them, at least in the near term, the next 20 to 30 years, I don't envision those kinds of those temporary closures being needed. If there's some other question about the public access, I'm happy to answer those questions.
I don't have another question about public access on the site here. I do, and I know I've brought this up probably every single time we've talked about the Eastern Shore Forest Conservation Initiative, but would someone mind just giving us like a 3-line synopsis of that project? Because I feel like we keep, every time something comes up, we write a Vlcf project, and I'm not sure everyone fully understands what the big picture goal is, because 8,000 some acres is huge, but it's not all being conserved in the same manner. I think the last grant round, it was an easement that was still going to be forested tract versus what we see before us today. So would someone just be able to give us a high level overview of what the conservation objectives is there? So maybe just selfishly, so I have an elevator pitch on what the project is.
Absolutely. This is Becky Glenn again. I'm happy to take that question for you. And just to clarify, the phase 1 aspect of that project, which protects 8,800 acres, is not an easement. It's a fee simple acquisition. and the current proposal is an additional 750 acres. This part of Virginia, the Delmarva, the lower part of the Delmarva Peninsula, is hemispherically important as a migratory bird corridor, and we have plenty of research and conservation work that has demonstrated and illustrated the need for the conservation of the need and actually enhancement of natural habitats for these migratory birds as they work their way down the peninsula, getting into Accomack and Northampton counties. So our intent is to manage that forested landscape by gradually removing the industrial pine and replacing it with other trees and shrubs that are more beneficial to those millions of migratory birds using that corridor. We also are very much working towards a natural landscape that facilitates marsh migration in the face of sea level rise that will be particularly impactful on the bay side of the eastern shore. And having these natural places and being able to prepare and adapt those managed forests to become the leading edge of the marsh will facilitate natural transitions of the wildlife that use those marshes now and into the future. And lastly, from our perspective, there is a significant deficiency of upland land available for public access for wildlife-related recreation on the eastern shore. There's a lot of marshland that's available, but very little and limited upland habitat. So having these parcels in public ownership makes them available to anyone to use for wildlife viewing, for hunting, for fishing, and for hiking and other related and compatible uses.
Thanks, Becky. Jay, does that give you what you need?
It does. I might not be able to get that all out in the elevator, but I'm just going to give them Becky's information when someone asks.
That's fine. We trust that with your substantial skills, you can summarize that into an elevator pitch. I see a number of comments from board members. I would like to see if there are any additional public comments first before we get into the board discussion. Parker Agilefsa, I see from Capital Region Land Conservancy, yes, he has put something in the chat. Parker, do you want to speak, or is the note that you sent sufficient?
Parker just put in the chat that the note's fine.
All right, sounds good. Gina, anybody else from the public?
That's all that I see from the public so far. Like you said, we have a couple other board comments and questions as well.
All right, great. Mr. Pollard, let's take your question on Pickett's Harbor first.
Thank you so much. And this sort of gets back to so first of all, I certainly understand that the tiger beetle, and I'm a little bit familiar with that part of the world. This gets back to the question of just kind of acreage size and how public dollars are being spent. We've got $250,000 on a 4.5 acre parcel. And when I look at points, protection of cultural resources, 8 out of 10, fish and wildlife, 9 out of 10, public access, 10 out of 10, which I don't underserve, under communities, 5 out of 5. It just seems like to me, from protecting the public resource, that it's not, I don't fully understand it. That's particularly true when I go to the website and look up Pickett's Harbor Natural Area Preserve. Like I can't even figure out where it is based upon the DCR website. And there might be good reason for not knowing where it is to protect, so it doesn't get trampled. But yeah, I don't understand how you can have a 10 out of 10 if you can't figure out where something is from a public access standpoint. So a little rambling, but if somebody could fill me in why such a small parcel, which probably can't really be fully developed certainly within 100 feet with a, endangered species on it. So I'll stop talking.
Yeah, no, Albert, thanks for the question. It's a fair one, particularly given the high scores for public access and other categories. Jason, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, I'm going to pull up the Pickett's Harbor website right now, so maybe I can interpret what that says regarding public access. As far as cost and size, I mean, I don't know what to say, but just that kind of is what it is on the shore. I mean, that's always a challenge there because of the high per acre land values. But that said, it still brings the same values in terms of expanding the preserve strategically, providing buffer, providing management access, and protecting the resources that are there. So on the website, on the Pickett's Harbor Natural Area Preserve website, under access, it says by arrangement. None of our preserves are hidden or concealed from the public because we don't want them trampled. They're all out on our website, and everyone has a descriptor for access. Where we have had the capacity, the funds, the arrangement of parcels to allow public access facilities. They're quaint, but a place to park, a kiosk, a trail to walk on, or a place to put a boat in the water. In cases like that, access is much more open and apparent. But in terms of Pickett's Harbor, this is a case where we can't claim that, certainly not advertise that, because we haven't had a point of access thus far. So on the website, it says by arrangement with steward. And then it gives the contact information for our coastal region steward, so that when people want to access there, at least we can know that, and that we can point them to how they might access it. Ideally, we would go with them, help interpret, know where to walk.
Jason, if I can interrupt you, I'm not arguing that might be the valid use for already owned state property. My question is, how can it score a 10 out of 10 for public access when we know that a stretched staff should meet them? And that's part of the question.
Okay. Not without having to flip through the grant manual, Sue, can you remind me how the points breakdown is for number of days per year?
10 is full public access, 365 days a year.
Okay. Well, because I would, and again, I don't have our scoring sheet in front of us, nothing more than what you all have, but I'm going to say that is stated because these parcels provide DCR ownership around that cul-de-sac where unofficial access has been happening. With this, there will be the ability for DCR to control and allow access to the preserve like we haven't in the past.
Right. Jason, thanks for that. And Albert, I certainly appreciate your question. I find it a little bit hard to believe that if I called up the steward right now and said, hey, I want to go to Pickett's Harbor, that somebody can meet me down there this afternoon and grant me access. So, in the future, I think we need to tighten that up a little bit so that we're, staying true to what's in the grant manual, or, actually, put something in the project that is going to, to meet that standard, if we're going to be scoring it that high. I mean, that said, there are a lot of other factors that make this a very high scoring project, and I still think it is worthy of Vlcf funding, but that's a very good point that Mr. Pollard raises, and I just want to make sure that we're being 100% forthright with what we're advertising here.
And Larry Mickelson just confirmed that the application does say it'll be open 365. So that's what the scoring was based on. And that's what we would,
thank you.
yeah, and that's what we would require in the final recorded documents for the property, that it would state that in it. If they got the points, we go back when it comes time for these projects to close and ensure that whatever they promised and got points for is in the final document.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. Albert, are you good for now on that one?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm fine with property being closed off. I'm fine with it being open. I'm not okay with it getting the points for open if it's really not. So that's all that I ask, and let's work on this in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I know Glenda had a question on the Science Museum project, Ms. Booth.
Yes, I do. And thank you very much. And I think there are a lot of excellent projects in this package, and I'm pleased to support most of them. I'm especially encouraged by the project at the Science Museum in Richmond under the open space category. To me, it seems very innovative, and I certainly appreciate the need to conserve large tracts and to reduce forest fragmentation and to have more natural connectivity. I'm fully supportive of that. But we do have to recognize, that our state has a lot of urban and suburban areas, and there are conservation opportunities there. And I believe this project represents one of those. And it reminds me of the noted entomologist Doug Talmy, who said about our urban green spaces that in the past we expected them to be pretty, and now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. So my question to the staff is, in your description, you say that this project will have science-based natural solutions to address climate change. And what are those solutions?
Thank you for your question. I'm looking right now at the application again, and they go in quite detailed depth about their ideas, and they have a on-staff engineer that's designing this. But the detailed plans of the plantings that they're doing is quite amazing given the area that they're working with. And then additionally, the Science Museum has been working on urban studies based around air pollution and heat, index of paved areas. And so they're going to use this as an example, and pretty much they're saying, look at all of these different aspects and use this as a living laboratory. So I think more will be coming forward as they proceed with the project, but they're taking that all into due consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
I'd like to know more details when you have them.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, Glenda, we got a full presentation some months ago from the Science Museum leadership on this, and it is a really interesting project in addition to providing some much needed green space in that part of Richmond City and the Broad Street corridor. They are doing some innovative stuff. Now, will the trees that they're going to plant there sequester a ton of carbon and mitigate the urban heat island effect a lot? No, but they are important nonetheless. And I think the most important climate mitigation strategy there is the work that they're going to be doing to address stormwater runoff, because that's a flooding concern and a water quality concern for the Chesapeake Bay, and that's a pretty big open asphalt area right now, as I'm sure you and others know, and being able to better manage the flashier precipitation that we're seeing related to climate change and more extreme weather in that area is something that I think is important.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments from the board with respect to projects for this grant round?
Secretary Strickler, if I could just point out that I'll need to recuse myself or abstain on the Lakota Ranch project in the farmland preservation category.
Great, thank you, Ms. Umhoff.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Is there a motion to approve the slate as presented?
So moved, Mr. Chairman, Bob Lazaro.
Thanks, Bob. A second.
I second Glenda Booth.
Thank you. Motion properly seconded. Mike, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Secretary Strickler.
Aye.
Ms. Stiff.
Aye.
Ms. Hertz.
Aye.
Mr. Pollard. Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Volk.
Aye.
Ms. Imhoff.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Aye, but note that I am abstaining on Lakota Ranch.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Booth.
Aye.
Mr. Presley.
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro.
Aye.
Mr. Woodley. Senator Marsden.
Aye.
Senator Stewart.
Aye.
Ms. Andrews.
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Excellent. Thank you. Last big item of business today is the discussion of the FY22 grant round and the manual. So thanks everyone for the projects that came forward for the last grant round, and we look forward to seeing those all move forward. Got the required documents here for next grant round, fiscal plan timeline, manual, etc. And Sue, will turn it back over to you to run through those items for folks to consider.
Okay, thank you so much. And there was a lot of exciting grants in that last round. And thank you so much for all of your time for awarding those grants. And yes, we have another huge grant round now before us. And I've shared with everyone, and I can bring these up on my screen, the fiscal expenditure plan, if it's helpful. But we have the $7.5 million to be divided among the 5 categories, putting $1.5 million in each category. And then the proposed timeline, bring that up, hopefully. Go. And this would start the grant round today with an official announcement. And then Larry Mickelson and I would work to get out all of the emails and update the website and send out a grant announcement. We've proposed having a virtual grant workshop the week of June 28th and having August 9th as the deadline for applications. With the interagency task force having a couple weeks to score the projects, meet with our director and Director Chrisman and secretary, and then we'd have a board meeting hopefully in early October to award the next grants. And then we can move on to the grant manual. Unless there's questions on the fiscal expenditure plan or the timeline. Okay, so with the grant manual, do you want me to bring up a copy of the grant manual or just look at our hard copies if you have one at home?
It probably makes sense, Sue, to put it up on the screen.
Okay. Let me just Okay. So at the beginning of the grant manual, we're proposing just some updates to the language and clarifications. We rearranged a couple bullets so it would flow better, and trying to shorten the grant manual. But every time we try to shorten it, it seems like it gets longer. So the beginning part, the beginning section, I don't think there's anything controversial here. And then we've updated the application information just with the proposed date, the deadline, and keeping it as paperless applications. It's all got to be emailed. And then there were no changes proposed in farmlands. So I'll just scroll through the agricultural section. There was one change that was proposed in the Conserve Virginia scoring. Instead of breaking it down, in the past, it was if the property was in Conserve Virginia, like 1% to 49%, they got 10 points, or 50% to 100, they were awarded 20 points. And it was suggested to change this to sort of a sliding scale to figure out the percentage of the property in Conserve Virginia and multiply that by 20. And so we've done that for each of the categories. And then we get to the forest land preservation, where Carl has proposed some changes. And this would be a good time, I suppose, unless you want me to scroll for Carl to explain his changes here, or we can do it at the score sheets, might be more, wherever you'd like to do it.
I'll defer to Carl on that whenever he thinks it's the appropriate time.
Yeah, I'm happy to quickly explain the proposed changes here. I think maybe I'll just share a real quick screen here on this. If you can give me the share screen, Susan.
Yeah, 1 second.
I proposed, I kind of did a deep dive into the scoring and how various projects might fall out, or hypothetical projects might fall out on the scoring, and identified some things that we could do to probably make better decisions. Let me.
Why am I not seeing you on here?
The major changes, there are a number of changes I've suggested. Most of them are relatively minor, that don't affect the scoring, they simply affect the simplicity of the scoring so that people can calculate their scores a little bit more easier than they did before. I'm using a simple equation rather than some of the kind of complicated categories that we had before. Susan, do we have a share screen yet?
Yes, just got it. Sorry about that.
Can you see a screen? Just seeing my note. Hold on a second. This is okay, should be able to see this. So most of the changes to the first sheet are in the second and third criteria, which are currently score projects based on the percentage of the property that is in forest, and the third criteria is the percentage of the property that's in high conservation value forest. What I'm suggesting is to changing those two criteria from being based on a percentage to being based on straight acreage. the percentages can really create some unintuitive and strange results that I have a couple of examples down below to show you what that means. So there's 4 example properties there. The first is a small property of 20 acres that is, let's suggest that it's 100% high conservation value forest. Currently, under the percentage basis, that small property, which is 100% forested and 100% high conservation value forest, would get a 35. You can compare that to a large property, 1,000 acres, that is 100% forest, 100% high conservation forest would get a 45 right now. The third one down there is a large property, again, the same size property, but only 50% forested, meaning there's 500 acres of high conservation value forest, and a medium property at the last one that is 500 acres and 100% forested. So it is got 500 acres of high conservation value forest. Right now, that makes sense. The small property doesn't score as well as that really large property that has a heck of a lot more high conservation value forest on it. But what doesn't make sense is that the small property that's 20 acres and has 20 acres of high conservation value forest scores a heck of a lot higher than a property that's 1,000 acres and has 500 acres of forest on it. It's that percentage that's hammering that large property and dropping its score. If I had my druthers, I would certainly go for a property that has 500 acres of high conservation value forest than a very small property that has 20 acres of high conservation value forest. Also, this is just another example of the kind of strange results that the percentages can create. A large property, again, that's 1,000 acres in size and is 50% forested, meaning it has 500 acres of high conservation value forest, can score higher, substantially. Actually, yeah, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to do. Sorry. A large property that's 100%. Sorry, a large property that is 1,000 acres in size and 50% forested, and score that has 500 acres of forest will score lower than a medium property that's 500 acres in size and has the same amount of forest on it. So the larger property that has the exact same amount of high conservation value forest is scoring a lot lower. So I guess the take-home message is those percentages can create very strange results. So what I've suggested is simply changing those from percentages to straight acreage. And the ranking and the scoring of those properties will make a lot more sense. So above, we'll compare the previous method, the previous scoring to the scoring below. I hope that makes some sense. In summary, that percentage can give an immense amount of advantage to a small, very small property that is 100% forested and 100% high conservation value forest, while properties that have much more of those two values, forest and high conservation value forest, can oddly rank a lot lower. Is that good enough explanation? If anybody have any questions, I can go through that again.
I raised the question earlier, and I just put in the chat that I completely understand that the percentage basis for scoring can result in smaller projects getting de facto much better scores than they probably should. But I just worry that the cure for that problem creates no space really for smaller projects, because effectively they're not going to be able to score very high.
Yeah, I agree. I guess my balance to that is that if a small property is proposed, hopefully will be proportionally a lot less expensive in terms of the amount of funds it needs to request from VLCF, and that in the current way, we can find room for those small projects that have relatively good value. I wouldn't be, I guess the other question I have is, to me, projects that protect substantially less forest and less HCV forest should, in fact, rank lower. I'm open to other ways of giving a little boost to those small projects. They still can, I should mention, score better if they score well on the other criteria, like adjacency, the forest land preservation and the management of multiple resources, and having a lot of water quality resources on the property. They can boost their scores that way.
I hear you. I appreciate you spending time on the answer. I think this is one of those maybe that we try it and see how it goes.
Yeah.
This is Mary Carson Stiff. I have a huge problem with this approach. It is going to completely detract from a small parcel's ability to compete in this space. I mean, I understand the nuance between the two larger examples that you provided. I mean, that discrepancy, it makes sense to ameliorate, but doing this will really, it'll crush small parcels. And the argument that small parcels will cost less and so they'll be able to like squeeze in is not how it happens now. Yeah. In the urban and suburban context, and that's the district that I represent, the properties cost so much more for a small amount. And so our program is already not helping urban and suburban properties, and this would be devastating. So we've got to figure something. We've got to do something different.
The solution would be to incorporate a criteria that gives a score to urban and community forests in the forest category. So there's a criteria that says if you're an urban and community forest or provide benefits for urban and community forests, you get points for that. I don't think the solution to that is the runaround of trying to get it into this percentage base or getting into as percentage or straight acreage. Yeah, my suggestion would, the question becomes, what is the objective of protecting small properties? What are we aiming at? Are we just aiming at protecting small properties because they're small? Or are there other values, or is the real objective there are other values to some of those properties that need to be incorporated into the scoring? And I entirely agree with you that the urban and community forests are not currently represented in our scoring and should be. We just haven't had a chance to get to how to do that in the current round. The other objective of small properties might be something associated with landowners that don't have the financial resources to maintain their properties that the larger landowners might. And I'm certainly happy to entertain discussions about how to get that kind of criteria in here. But I'm not so sure it's good to shoehorn it into other criteria. I would prefer to add new criteria.
Yeah, I think adding, I mean, however it works to kind of equal it out, whether that's new criteria or whatever, but I think that including them in this percentage, which is what's being proposed, I just don't think is a good idea.
Can I ask a couple of questions here? And I apologize, I don't have this right in front of me, but is there anything in the statute about what the purpose of the forest category, forest conservation category is that guides what we are supposed to do here? I'm a little bit embarrassed that I don't know the answer to that question right off the top of my head.
I don't know. I don't have the code or that in front of me. I certainly know that the forest category, the forest category is created to try to protect forest resources that are socially, economically, and from a conservation standpoint important to the Commonwealth.
Okay, so given that, and assuming that there aren't any constraints on what we can do within the forest category as far as small tracts are concerned, Carl, I think the proposal that you made there to create a separate category in the grant manual is a good one. So why wasn't that part of these fairly significant proposed amendments in this grant manual?
I think it's an operational challenge. Is how, for example, the community and urban forests issue, how to get that criteria within the forestry category. Operationally, what information are we going to use to score it? I don't have a handle on it yet.
All right, so I guess my question, and maybe Mary Carson, since you raised this, you have a comment on is, and others probably do as well, it seems like that doing that and figuring that out would be a good idea.
Agreed.
Do we want to, it's going to take some time, obviously. Do we want to work on that while these, and also accept these changes to the grant manual for this time? Or do we want to not make changes to the grant manual for this category until we've had a chance to fully consider the kind of small urban community forest question and incorporate that? I mean, again, we do this for every grant round, so I don't know that there's necessarily a lot of harm in moving forward with these changes and making additional changes after we've kind of come up with a proposal for the question at issue here. But any thoughts on that from the board member?
Mr. Chairman, it's Richard Stewart.
Yes, sir.
I think what is being proposed makes perfect sense. It makes no sense that the scoring actually comes out the way it does now. And so it seems to me it makes sense to move forward with those changes, and then perhaps some other changes can be proposed later that we can consider for the small urban areas. That's a tougher nut to crack, because while I hear the argument that we want to make it equal, the fact of the matter is it just isn't. And you can't compare the conservation value of a very small tract versus a very large tract. In some of these areas that particularly are on the river, or other sensitive areas that present a huge conservation benefit, particularly to water quality. And I speak directly to the part of the world that I live in and you live in, and it's very important. So I think it makes sense to move forward with what is being presented now, and then let's look at other criteria to discuss to help the small urban, suburban parcels compete as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Senator. I'll note that Mr. McCarthy, who had been the one who had questioned this, has put a note in the chat that said, with a good faith effort to address the concern in later rounds, he suggests moving forward with what is proposed. So we may be circling around a way forward here, but there are other comments from members of the board.
My only other comment, I think it's not just small parcels in urban, suburban areas, but it's where parcels are important for connectivity and infill. So I wouldn't limit it just to the urban context.
Connectivity is considered in the current statutory scoring in the distance from a proposed property is from an existing conserved land.
Yeah, I agree. I know.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Marston.
Yes, sir.
Has there ever been any consideration with these smaller projects, and I certainly get what my colleague Senator Stewart says, that there might be a set aside for some small projects that keeps them out of competition with the larger one, At the end of the day, I don't know whether that it creates a problem, but it might be something to consider, is to sort of put them in a different category so that they can be scored appropriately.
Thank you, Senator. I think that's kind of the question that we're trying to answer. I don't believe in the past, and Director Chrisman, correct me if I'm wrong, but that has been done. But I think it's something that it sounds like some folks want to have a conversation about going forward, and I think that's appropriate.
Yes, sir, that's correct, Mr. Secretary. I don't recall that we've ever done that, but that would be something that the board could consider if in the future, is to perhaps look at reserving some funds for smaller projects. I will note, first of all, Mr. Secretary, your question about the code. The best thing I found in the code in terms of guidance is simply calls it forest land conservation in several different places. So that doesn't provide us a whole lot of additional guidance there. But I will also mention this, and Carl could confirm this. I don't think this proposed change would have made any difference in this last grant round that you just awarded. So I'm not sure how much difference it'll make going forward. I guess we could certainly report to the board. If you adopt this change, we can certainly let you know, how much this change would impact your decision-making process for this grant round, and you can adjust accordingly.
It would not have made a difference in the ranking of projects. The last ranked project that we did not end up making recommendations for is perhaps a good example. It was a very small total acreage project, maybe, I don't remember the exact, but 90 acreage property, maybe 50% forested. So 45, 50 acres of forest, not very much high conservation value forest. The new scoring would, as Mary Carson suggests, would hammer that property. Would actually, it scored pretty close to the other projects in terms of, especially in terms of the total score. The statutory score, it was a little behind. It would hammer it in terms of the statutory score. It would not change the rest of the scores that go into the total score all that much. So these small projects can still gain points by those other criteria in the total score. But it would substantially reduce how well it scored. And yeah, and I'm okay with that. I think that's appropriate. I mean, you can start trying to game the system to get higher percentages of forest by just adding a little properties around the sides, and that becomes a problem.
All right. We need to keep moving here. Secretary Ring is not at the meeting today, but Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, Heidi Hertz, is here. I want to give Heidi a chance to share any thoughts she has on this, and then I think I've got a proposal.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler, and thanks, Carl, for your explanation. That was really helpful. And thanks for the question. I think the explanation you gave, it makes a lot of sense for the changes that could be made, and thanks for walking us through that. I'm a visual learner, so that was super helpful to see where those discrepancies are. The urban and community forestry is a passion of Secretary Ring's and one that the Department of Forestry is working really hard on. So look forward to the board recommendations on how to move forward with that, and appreciate the work of everyone and everyone's input on how to consider the high conservation value lands of the larger acreage, but then also the importance of the smaller tracts as well. So appreciate that, and Secretary Strickler, thanks for your help.
Thank you, Heidi. It sounds like there's some interest in considering this further, while at the same time, moving forward in the short term with the revision for this grant manual. So I think I would propose that we allow this to stand, move on to the discussion of the rest of the grant manual, and then move this through. At the same time, I guess the question that I have for the board members is, do you all want staff to work together to analyze this, or should we set up some sort of an ad hoc committee of the board members to dive into this along with staff?
This is Glenda Booth. I support setting up an ad hoc committee to analyze this before the next grant round. And I also have a grant manual issue to bring up that could be part of that potentially.
Mr. Secretary, this is Shay Ford. I also would support a process that involves board members. I very much share the concerns that were raised by Mary Carson, but I also want to make sure that the eventual solution is not just a arbitrary awarding of points, and that we're actually taking the time to dig into the conservation values that are unique to urban communities that we might be able to focus on in order to make it fit our conservation objectives here. I think there's a way to do that, but I don't think we can do it on the fly.
Okay, thanks for those comments. What I will do is anybody who's interested in this, just shoot me an email, and then I'll put together a small subcommittee to start thinking on this and working with Secretary Ring's office and my office and the DCR and DOF staff on the approach we all agree we want to take. Ms. Booth, do you want to go ahead with your comment on the grant manual? It sounds like it may be at least somewhat related to this.
Yes, thank you. I want to let everyone know, the board members and others, that several of us were approached by the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. Virginia has 3 commissioners on that body, and they have proposed that in some fashion in our awarding of or judging grants, that we incorporate not just water quality, but how land contributes to drinking water quality. And this is not really just a Potomac River issue, but if you do look at the map of the Potomac River watershed, you'll see it's not just a boundary between Virginia and Maryland. The watershed stretches down in as far as Highland County, and there are 14 Virginia counties. In any case, the commission developed, with the support of 8 area water suppliers, developed something called a land conservation policy. And they developed a scientific process for prioritizing lands that contribute to water quality. So if you think of it as lands that are, for example, above a water intake. In any case, I believe that there's got to be, oh, and by the way, they identified over 3,000 acres in Virginia as high priority in terms of land that improves water quality. So I really think that we ought to give some serious consideration to this. I'm not suggesting we make a change today, but I think it's another issue that needs some examination, and I would hope that some of my fellow board members would want to be on a committee to do that. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks. Thanks, Glenda. Any comments on raises?
Mr. Chairman, Bob Lazaro, like Ms. Booth, I received some information, and I think it's worth forwarding to this special committee you're talking about for consideration, recognizing that the Conservation Fund is a statewide project, not just a certain area project, but it certainly merits some discussion by experts to take into consideration what's being proposed.
Got it. I agree with you all that this is something we ought to take a closer look at. I think that the questions of urban and small parcel forest conservation and forest conservation for water supply protection are adjacent enough and kind of overlapping enough that this can be handled by one group rather than two. So if there are no objections, I will work with my team to put together a coalition of the willing to dive a little bit deeper into those issues. Okay, great. Sue, do you want to continue working through the grant manual, keeping in mind that we are now after noon and
Yes.
we still have a little bit more to get?
Yes. Well, fortunately, these were the major changes. We're in the forestry section that we've just discussed. In the historic area, Carrie and others at DHR updated their category to include statutory changes from this past session and to expand those that are eligible to apply in the historic category. I know that folks from DHR should be still here in the meeting if there were any questions. And Albert, did you say something in the comments that you wanted to bring up? Is it on this page?
Bottom of page 9, right where you are. It says such as properties associated with enslaved peoples. You know, of course, you had freemen in Virginia during that time, and a property associated with an enslaved person could be, you know, a plantation restoration, which is, I don't think, what we want. So I just suggested, I put it in the text box there, people of color during times of slavery.
Sue, this is Megan Melanette from DHR. You are correct. That was not our intention, and we thought we caught it in the African American category later on, but we're pleased to make that change.
Whatever works. Thanks.
Thanks, Albert. Thanks, Megan. Are folks amenable to allowing staff to clean this up rather than do a line amendment here? Okay.
Thank you. And let's see, keep going here now to the natural areas section. And this section looks like there was a lot of changes, but really they've just reorganized everything to make it more clear for applicants. Jason, did you want to touch base on this at all?
In the interest of time, no, but I'm happy to answer any questions. What you said is accurate, Sue. This was really just trying to make things more clear, really in the interest of applicants having more knowledge of the natural area category values and therefore being able to get the highest score they can get.
Okay, and then going into the open spaces and parks, we've provided some more links to the different mappers that we're referring to. And there's a new recreation access model that was created, or update to it, the nature-based rec access model. So we've incorporated that into the open spaces and parks. And the new model doesn't address urban areas with much details, so we're also including the Trust for Public Lands Park Serve model and providing a link for that. And here, the Crystal and Kelly will score the application based on both models and take whichever score is higher for the application, giving it a full review. And then there's the Conserve Virginia points. Let's see, and additional scoring, we've just clarified that the nature-based rec access model name has been changed, same link. There was one change that I wanted to request that wasn't, oh, it's not, it's in the scoring section, I'm sorry. Just to clarify public access when we get to the scoring sheets. No changes here. Sorry that I'm driving the remote control here. I don't want anyone to get seasick. update just to what's required in the application, just clarifications, nothing new except for shape files. If the applicants have this technology and create shape files, it would be great for them. We're recommending that they share those with us to expedite scoring. And then we go into the scoring sheets, and we've been through the forest land preservation and historic. You can see they added underrepresented communities here and took points from historic significance and threat to create 10 points in underrepresented communities. And the natural, Lisa McGee, can you please mute your phone? I don't know if that was you, but your phone isn't showing as muted. Maybe that was where that noise was coming from. I'm sorry, this was the natural areas category. And you can see that Jason did not make any changes here except to clarify what we'd already had. And sorry, it's jumping around now. Let's see. And open space and parks, there's just clarifying. They've sort of rearranged some of the scoring to be additional, like in the VOP, instead of just listing certain access, you get points here. We've listed it all, and it's additive up to the maximum 10 points. And again, this is just the recreation access model, showing it broken out into the two different models that we'll be checking. And getting down to the additional scoring criteria, here we added some more examples of potential cultural resources that might be on a property. And in public access, we currently say limited public access. I'll highlight that. I don't know if that shows up on your screen, is less than 180 days per year. And that really should say 1 to 180 days per year. So that's sort of just a technical clarification again, that I hope you guys would be okay if we change that. And then this is just clarifying the ratio of match that you have to provide us with an appraisal in order to get those points. And we made it. That was it. Any questions?
Great. Thanks, Sue. I think the order that we wanted to do this is see if there are any questions from the public first, and then have a board discussion before we vote. Are there any public comments on the grant manual?
This is John McCarthy. I had applied one earlier about the use of Conserve Virginia and whether it made sense to have the applicants on future grant rounds sort of self-report how their application complied with Conserve Virginia or overlapped with Conserve Virginia. It's probably just an evolutionary thing. It does seem to be the instrument's pretty user-friendly and accessible now, so they could do that and help staff, I would think, get a first cut at things.
We do request that they send us a screenshot of Conserve Virginia because it's due for an update. But if we're going to be, we do shape files for them for the projects anyway. So if the applicant can send us that type of technology, that's awesome. Otherwise, yeah, we do it anyway.
Okay.
Thanks. Hearing no further comments and not seeing anything in the chat or anything from Gina, I will open it up for members of the board to discuss anything else about the grant manual. All right. Seeing no comments there, is there a motion to approve the manual as presented with the caveat that staff will make technical and conforming changes as noted in the discussion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman. Bob Lazaro.
Thanks, Bob. Is there a second?
A second, this is John Paul Woodley.
Thank you, Mr. Woodley. Motion made and seconded. Mike, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Secretary Strickland. Ms. Stiff?
Aye.
Ms. Hertz?
Aye.
Mr. Pollard? Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Volk?
Aye.
Ms. Imhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Booth?
Aye.
Mr. Presley?
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro?
Aye.
Mr. Woodley?
Aye.
Senator Marsden? Senator Stewart?
Aye. I'm sorry. Aye. Senator Marsden's an aye.
Thank you. Ms. Andrews?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And thanks, everybody, for bearing with us through a long agenda. I guess this is what happens when you've got a little more money than we did at the beginning of the term. So I think that's good news, and looking forward to hopefully getting together in person in the fall to award some grants for the FY22 grant round. But that's all we've got for today. Good to see everybody again, and have a good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you.